Get ready because today we're shrinking down, way down to microscopic size.
Oh, it's going to be fun.
We are diving deep into one of the most fundamental structures in all living things.
The cell membrane.
Yep. We're talking about the cell membrane, and we're going way beyond the textbook definitions. We're going to uncover the secrets of this super important cellular border.
Sounds good to me.
We've got some amazing listener research to unpack today. It's going to get electrifying.
Electrifying. How so?
Well, we're going to learn how this membrane acts like a bouncer, deciding who gets in and who gets left out. We'll discover how ions feel electrical forces. And get this, we're even going to see how the membrane generates its own voltage.
Just like a battery.
Exactly, a tiny battery. Get ready for some serious aha moments. I think our listeners are going to be blown away by all of this.
I think you're right. I mean, it's amazing how we just picture the cell membrane as this simple wall, right?
Right.
But in reality, it's so much more than that. It's dynamic, it's constantly changing, and it's a total bustling city border.
I love that analogy, the cell membrane as a bustling city border. So we've got this city border, the membrane, and it's made up of what's called the lipid bilayer, right?
Exactly. The lipid bilayer. Imagine it like a two-layered sandwich.
Okay, a sandwich. I like it. What's in this sandwich?
It's made with these fascinating molecules called phospholipids. And here's the cool part. Phospholipids have a bit of a split personality.
Oh. Tell me more about this split personality.
Oh, they have what we call a hydrophilic head, which basically means water-loving.
Hydrophilic water-loving, got it.
And then they have these hydrophobic tails. Those are water-fearing. They want to stay as far away from water as possible.
Hydrophobic water-fearing. So they love water and they hate water. Interesting.
Exactly. And that's what makes them organize themselves so perfectly to create this waterproof barrier.
Mm.
So picture this. The water-loving heads face outwards.
Outwards, like towards the inside and outside of the cell.
Exactly. They love the watery environment there. And then the water-fearing tails.
They're probably hiding in the middle.
You got it. They tuck themselves away in the middle, all cozy and protected from the water. And this creates that super selective barrier.
A barrier that's essential for controlling what gets in and out of the cell. Okay, so I'm with you. We've got this awesome bilayer, this city border. But if it's such a tight barrier, how do things get in?
Right. Think about it. We need stuff like oxygen to survive. And it has to get into our cells somehow.
Right.
That's where the selective part comes in.
Okay, selective. So it's not an all or nothing barrier.
Right. Think of it like this. Small, uncharged molecules.
Like oxygen.
Yes, like oxygen. Or carbon dioxide. These guys are like VIPs. They've got a backstage path. They just slip right through the membrane, no problem.
Okay, so they get the VIP treatment. What about the larger molecules?
Now, the larger or charged molecules, like glucose, for instance.
Glucose, that's sugar, right?
Yeah, sugar. Those guys can't just waltz in. They need special permission to enter.
So they need like a special key card?
Something like that. Think of it like dedicated channels or transporters, like special doors they need to go through.
Ah, okay, I'm picturing it now. The cell membrane really is like a high-security building with all sorts of special entry points.
Exactly. And what about those ions we hear so much about? They probably have a tough time getting in.
Oh, yeah, ions like sodium, potassium, those guys.
Exactly. They can't just squeeze through the membrane.
They're probably too charged, right?
Yeah. And they need a special escort service. We call those ion channels.
Ion channels, got it. I'm starting to see how this all fits together, but why is it so important to control these ions anyway?
That's a great question. And this is where it gets really interesting. You see, the cell membrane isn't just a physical barrier. It's also a tiny electrical powerhouse.
Hold on. A tiny what?
A powerhouse, like a tiny battery.
Okay, I did not see that coming. How does a cell membrane act like a battery?
It all comes down to something called membrane potential, or V. It's a mouthful, but it just means the difference in electrical charge across the membrane. Just like a battery has a positive and a negative terminal, right?
Right, a positive and negative terminal.
The cell maintains a slightly negative charge inside compared to the outside.
So it's a little bit like a battery. That's so wild.
It is. And it's typically around negative 70 millivolts.
Negative 70 millivolts. That seems tiny.
It is tiny.
But
But it's essential. It's the key to a lot of really important functions in the cell.
what kind of functions?
Well, think about nerve impulses, how our nerves transmit signals, or how our muscles contract. That tiny voltage is crucial for all of that.
Okay, so that tiny voltage plays a big role. It's like a miniature electrical grid powering the entire cell.
Exactly. And it's all thanks to the careful regulation of those ions we were talking about.
Okay, so I'm getting a sense of how important ions and electrical charges are here, but How do these ions actually move across the membrane? It can't be random, right?
No, not random at all. It's very tightly controlled. And it's all because of something called electrochemical gradients.
Electrochemical gradients. Okay, so I'm picturing a gradient, like a slope. What's electrochemical about it?
Imagine you're at a concert, a really crowded concert, where everyone wants to get closer to the stage.
Okay, I can picture that.
That's kind of like a concentration gradient, where molecules naturally want to move from areas where there's a lot of them to where there are fewer. They want to spread out.
Right, they want to even things out. So that's the concentration part of the gradient. What about the electro part?
Well, now imagine that there are security guards at that concert
Mm-hmm.
trying to manage the crowd. They might push people back to create more space.
Okay, I see. Pushing back against the crowd.
Exactly. And that pushing is like the electrical potential. Because remember, ions are charged particles.
Right, they're either positive or negative.
Exactly. So they're influenced by both that concentration gradient, that urge to spread out.
The crowd wanting to get to the stage.
Right. And the electrical potential, that push and pull of charges.
So it's a push and pull system, like two forces acting on these ions.
Precisely. And we can actually measure the force of each of these pushes and pulls.
We can. How?
We can measure what's called the chemical potential. That's the force from the concentration gradient.
Chemical potential.
And we can measure the electrical potential. That's the force from the charges.
Wow, we're really getting into the physics of the cell here.
We are. But it's not too complicated. They're both measured in joules per mole, just like energy.
Okay, joules per mole. That rings a bell from physics class. So we've got chemical potential and electrical potential. What happens when we combine them?
When we combine them, we get the electrochemical potential.
Okay, the electrochemical potential, and that determines.
It determines everything. It tells us whether an ion will flow into the cell or out of the cell.
So if the electrochemical potential is positive, the ion wants to rush in.
Yes,
And if it's negative, it's like, nope, I'm out of here.
exactly. The electrochemical potential sums up all the forces that are acting on that little ion.
So much math happening at such a tiny scale.
It is remarkable, isn't it?
It really is. And you said there's a point where it all balances out, right?
Yes. We call that the Nernst potential. It's the membrane potential where there's no net movement of a particular ion.
No net movement. So everything's perfectly balanced. It's like the ion's moment of zen.
Exactly. We can even calculate this potential for each ion.
Oh, wow. So we can figure out the exact point where an ion is perfectly happy, neither coming in nor going out.
Yes, exactly. It's a really important concept for understanding how cells maintain stable ion concentrations.
Got it. The Nernst potential. Perfect ion balance. But what about those ions that need to move against the flow? You know, like swimming upstream.
Ah, that's where active transport comes in. And it's truly remarkable.
Active transport. So it's not just those gradients we were talking about?
Right. Active transport requires energy. It's like swimming against the current.
Oh, I see. So it's like those ions need a little extra help to get where they need to go?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the best example of active transport is the sodium-potassium pump. Have you heard of that?
The sodium-potassium pump? Yeah, I've heard the name, but tell me, what does it actually do?
This pump is amazing. It's constantly working to pump 3 sodium ions out of the cell for every 2 potassium ions it pumps in.
Wait, so it's pumping things both in and out. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is. And it's working against their concentration gradients, too.
Against their concentration gradient. So it's not just moving them, it's moving them in the opposite direction of where they want to go.
Exactly. It's like pushing a boulder uphill. It takes a lot of energy.
So where does it get this energy?
That's where ATP comes in. ATP is like the cell's energy currency.
Ah, ATP. Right, the fuel that powers the cell.
Right. And the sodium-potassium pump uses ATP to power all this movement. It's constantly working to maintain the right balance of ions inside and outside the cell. A tiny, tireless machine.
Incredible. It's like a whole other world happening down there at the cellular level. I never realized so much was going on just to keep these tiny ions in check.
And that balance is vital. It's like the foundation for so many things. We're talking nerve function, muscle contraction, fluid balance. It all comes back to this careful regulation of ions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. So the sodium-potassium pump is a key player in all of this.
But you mentioned there were other transporters too, right?
Oh yeah, there's a whole team working behind the scenes.
A whole team. Tell me more.
Well, for starters, there are co-transporters.
Transporters, yeah. They're kind of like hitchhikers.
Hitchhikers? How so?
Well, they move 2 or more different types of ions in the same direction, across the membrane.
Oh, so they're not picky. They'll take anyone along for the ride.
That's one way to put it. Think of it like a carpool for ions.
A carpool? I like it.
One example is the sodium-potassium chloride co-transporter.
Sodium-potassium chloride, that's a mouthful.
It is. We usually just call it NKCC for short.
NKCC. Okay, much easier. So what does this NKCC do?
It moves sodium, potassium, and chloride ions all together into the cell.
3 for the price of 1. Why would a cell need to move so many ions at the same time?
Well, it's all about efficiency. And it's about maintaining very specific ion ratios inside the cell.
Wow, ratios, like making sure there's just the right balance of each type of ion.
Exactly. Different cellular processes need very precise concentrations of different ions. So by moving them together, co-transporters can really fine-tune those balances.
I see, so it's like a delicate balancing act. What about those exchangers you mentioned? Are they kind of like co-transporters, but in reverse?
You're on the right track. Exchangers are basically swap teams. They trade one ion for another, moving them in opposite directions across the membrane.
So one goes in, one goes out.
You got it. It's like a trade agreement between two countries.
Interesting. What's an example of an exchanger?
A classic example is the sodium-hydrogen exchanger.
Another long name.
Yeah, they can be. We call it NHE for short.
NHE. Okay, so what does NHE swap?
It kicks out a sodium ion and brings in a hydrogen ion.
So sodium goes out, hydrogen comes in. Okay, I'm noticing a pattern here. Sodium seems to be involved in a lot of these transport systems. Is that just a coincidence?
Not at all. Sodium is a superstar when it comes to membrane transport. It's actually the most abundant ion outside of cells.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and its concentration gradient is a powerful force. Other transporters can actually use it to their advantage.
Oh, so it's like sodium is setting the stage for all these other transport activities to take place.
Exactly. Think of it like a river. The flow of the river can be harnessed to generate power. Sodium's concentration gradient is like that river.
Sodium, the energy currency of the membrane transport world.
This is really making me see how interconnected everything is down there at the cellular level.
It is. It's a beautiful dance of molecules all working together to keep the cell alive and thriving.
So you've got these pumps, these co-transporters, these exchangers, all moving ions around. But they need energy to do all that, right?
That's right. Remember ATP?
Yeah, ATP. The cellular fuel, exactly. We talked about how the sodium-potassium pump uses ATP directly.
Right, to power all that uphill pushing of ions.
But many of the co-transporters and exchangers are a bit more sneaky. They use what's called secondary active transport.
Secondary active transport, what's that?
It means they don't use ATP directly. Instead, they take advantage of the concentration gradients that those primary active transporters have already created.
Ah, so they're like getting a free ride.
Exactly. They piggyback on the energy that's already been invested by other transporters. It's like a brilliant energy-saving strategy.
I never would have thought about it that way.
It's remarkable how efficient cells are.
So we've gone from thinking about the cell membrane as a simple wall to seeing it as this incredibly complex and dynamic transport system. It's like a bustling city with all sorts of traffic flowing in and out.
It is. We haven't even talked about all the other amazing things that the membrane does.
There's more. I'm all ears.
Oh, yeah. We've been so focused on how things move across the membrane, but the membrane itself is this fascinating structure with all sorts of specialized components.
Really? Tell me more. I'm ready to go deeper.
Well, remember those phospholipids we talked about? They're not alone in the membrane. There's also cholesterol.
Cholesterol, like the stuff that's bad for your heart.
Yeah, that cholesterol. But believe it or not, it's not always a bad guy. In fact, it plays a really important role in the cell membrane.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about cholesterol's good side.
Well, it acts like a fluidity buffer in the membrane.
A fluidity buffer? What does that even mean?
It basically helps maintain the membrane's flexibility, preventing it from getting too rigid or too fluid.
So it's like the Goldilocks of the membrane, keeping everything just right.
Exactly. Not too much, not too little. Just the right amount of cholesterol keeps the membrane happy and functioning properly.
I never would have thought of cholesterol that way. So we've got phospholipids, cholesterol. What else is mixed in there?
We've also got these things called glycolipids.
Glycolipids? Okay, that's a new one for me.
They're basically lipids with sugars attached to them. They're kind of like molecular flags waving around on the cell's surface.
Molecular flags, what do they do?
Well, they play a really important role in cell recognition.
Cell recognition, like helping cells identify each other.
Exactly. They help the cell say, hey, I'm a heart cell, or hey, I'm a brain cell,
So the membrane has its own language. That's so cool.
It is. And speaking of communication, the membrane is also covered in these things called protein receptors.
Receptors, like the ones we hear about with hormones and neurotransmitters.
You got it. Those receptors are often embedded right in the membrane.
Okay, I'm picturing it now. What do they do?
They're like tiny antennae, constantly picking up signals from the outside world and relaying those signals inside the cell.
Wow. So they bind to specific molecules like hormones or neurotransmitters.
Exactly. And that binding triggers a whole cascade of events inside the cell. It's like a chain reaction leading to a specific response.
So it's like a communication hub, allowing the cell to sense its environment and respond accordingly. That's amazing.
It is. It's like this incredible communication network, all happening within this tiny structure that's just a few nanometers thick.
I'm starting to realize just how much I took the cell membrane for granted. It's so much more than just a barrier. It's like the control center for the entire cell.
Exactly.
But I have to ask, with all of this complexity, what happens when something goes wrong?
Well, that's a great question. It leads us to the world of membrane-related diseases.
Membrane-related diseases. It sounds a little scary. I mean, the cell membrane is so important. So many things depend on it.
Yeah, it's true. When this complex system malfunctions, things can definitely go wrong.
What kinds of things can go wrong?
Well, one example that a lot of people have heard of is cystic fibrosis.
Oh, yeah, cystic fibrosis. I know it's a genetic disease.
It is. It's caused by a mutation in a gene that makes a chloride ion channel.
A chloride ion channel. So that's one of those channels we were talking about earlier, right?
Right. And this particular channel is responsible for moving chloride ions across cell membranes. It's especially important in the lungs and the digestive system.
Okay, so if this channel isn't working right, what happens?
Well, without proper chloride transport, the balance of fluids and salts gets messed up.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And that leads to a buildup of this thick mucus. It clogs the airways and can cause serious breathing problems.
I see. So just one type of ion channel malfunctioning can have a huge impact.
It really can. It's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
One malfunctioning protein can disrupt a whole system.
Are there other diseases that are linked to problems with the cell membrane?
Oh, tons. There are so many. Some forms of muscular dystrophy, for example, are caused by mutations in genes that are responsible for keeping the muscle cell membranes strong and stable.
So the muscles actually weaken because of problems with the cell membrane.
Exactly. And certain types of diabetes are linked to problems with insulin receptors.
Ah, insulin receptors. Those are on the cell membrane, right?
Right. And they play a crucial role in regulating blood sugar.
So understanding how the cell membrane works isn't just theoretical. It's really important for understanding and treating diseases.
Absolutely. It's like having a map to a complex machine. If you know how all the parts are supposed to work, you can figure out where things might be breaking down.
And that knowledge helps us develop better treatments, right?
Exactly. It's revolutionized medicine. Think about it. So many drugs target those specific ion channels or transporters that we've been talking about.
Oh, like how? Give me an example.
Well, think about those medications for high blood pressure, the antihypertensive drugs.
Okay, I've heard of those.
Some of those drugs actually work by blocking calcium channels in smooth muscle cells.
Blocking calcium channels, how does that help with blood pressure?
Well, when you block those channels, it helps the blood vessels relax.
Oh, so it's like taking your foot off the gas pedal of blood vessel constriction?
Exactly. And then there are antidepressants. Some of them work by inhibiting the reuptake of certain neurotransmitters.
Inhibiting reuptake, what does that mean?
It means that they prevent those neurotransmitters from being taken back up into the cell too quickly.
So they stay in the synapse longer and can have a stronger effect.
Exactly. It's like making sure a message gets delivered by preventing it from being removed from the mailbox too soon.
That's a great way to put it. So we're using our knowledge of the cell membrane to develop more targeted and effective treatments for all sorts of conditions.
We are. It's amazing how far we've come in understanding these tiny details and how they impact our health.
And it's not just about traditional drugs, right? There are all sorts of new approaches being explored. What about things like gene therapy or nanotechnology?
Oh, absolutely. Those are hot areas of research. Gene therapy holds huge potential for treating those membrane-related diseases we were talking about.
Oh, how so?
Well, scientists are working on ways to deliver healthy genes that can basically fix the defects in the ones that code for membrane proteins.
So you could actually replace a faulty gene with a healthy one.
That's the idea. Imagine being able to replace that faulty fluoride channel in someone with cystic fibrosis. That could be life-changing.
Wow, that's incredible. What about nanotechnology? How is that being used?
Well, nanotechnology is helping us create these tiny nanoparticles. They can carry medications directly to specific cells or tissues.
So it's like having targeted missile systems for drug delivery.
That's a great analogy. And these nanoparticles can interact with cell membranes in very precise ways. They can even deliver drugs directly into cells.
It sounds like science fiction.
It does, but this stuff is becoming a reality. The possibilities are endless.
So the more we learn about the cell membrane, the more potential we have to treat diseases and improve human health.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond human health, too. Understanding membrane transport is crucial for fields like agriculture and environmental science.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, for example, in agriculture, researchers are trying to engineer plants that can absorb nutrients more efficiently.
More efficient nutrient uptake. Why is that important?
Think about it. If plants can absorb nutrients more efficiently, they can grow better in less fertile soil, and they might even need less water.
That could have a huge impact on food security around the world.
Exactly. And in environmental science, understanding how pollutants affect cell membranes is really important for protecting the environment.
How so?
Well, some pollutants can actually damage the cell membrane, which can harm or even kill plants and animals.
Oh, wow. So by studying these effects, we can find ways to protect the environment from those harmful pollutants.
Exactly.
Wow, I never realized how far-reaching the impact of the cell membrane is. It's involved in everything: health, agriculture, the environment. It's amazing.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface today.
This deep dive has totally changed my perspective. I used to think of the cell membrane as a simple wall, and now I see it as this dynamic and vital structure that's at the heart of so many important processes.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a truly remarkable structure, and it deserves all the attention it can get.
Well, I think it's safe to say that our listeners have gained a whole new appreciation for the amazing world of the cell membrane.
I hope so.
And to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring. There's always more to learn. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.